Greetings, heroes. It is I, your friendly neighborhood Rabbi John Carrier, and I am coming to you live from beautiful, sunny Southern California. I think it's about 65 and sunny out there right now, hardly a cloud in the sky. Today we are talking about Parashat Tazria. This is the weekly Torah portion for this week that's coming up. We got Shabbat starts tonight and goes into tomorrow during the day. And Jews around the world will be studying the same Torah portion, and that is Parashat Tazria. Just checking over here to make sure all the intertubes are connected for what is going to be a live studio recording session for the Jew Curious Show podcast. And God willing, get this out on the podcast before Shabbat starts so people can listen to it before Shabbat. You want to listen to it on Shabbat, that's your business. And just really want to learn this Torah portion with you. And I'm a little nervous because this Torah portion is kind of icky. And I say this as somebody who is a big fan of scary movies and zombies and scary looking stuff. And this Torah portion has a lot of scary looking stuff. It's about people who have these skin afflictions, and they have scaly skin. And sometimes I'll say an inapt translation for this word sa'arat that says people have is leprosy. And so we read a lot in the Torah about lepers and leprosy and stuff like that. Just to be super clear up front, this is not what we talk about today as leprosy. Leprosy is, in my non-medical understanding, a communicable neurological disorder known technically as Hansen's disease, when people are in leper colonies and things like that. And I've never seen somebody who had leprosy before. Until I was a teenager. I was like 19 years old. I went to Nepal, which is a country kind of sandwiched between China and India, and I saw a lot of people with leprosy. And so I can imagine that when people saw things back in the day that looked like this, it was disturbing. And so this particular Parsha is talking about a skin affliction that medieval commentators might have thought of as leprosy, not really understanding the biomedical nature of it. But what's really clear in this is that it's not talking about like a communicable disease that you just get by touching somebody. What the rabbis reveal is that this is a spiritual condition that manifests itself physically. And we're going to talk more about that today. What might be the particular cause of this spiritual condition? How do we remedy that? How do we know that this is the cause of it? What the afflicted person's responsibility is within the community in which they reside? What is the responsibility of the members of the community to either, shun them or take care of them? And the answer might be both. So before we get into that, I just want to acknowledge all the great people who have joined us for the chat today. I'm seeing Vanessa and Kathy. And KG Wilcox is joining us from the Philadelphia suburbs. Welcome, KG Wilcox. Glad to see you. Trig Bell is joining us. Jason Brown. What's going on, Jason Brown? I believe Jason's coming in from Ireland, if I'm not mistaken. So let's see. We're going to get started in just a second. Ruthie shares 2 Capricorns in the house. That's awesome. I guess happy birthday a couple months ago, if that's the case. So we're going to start in just a minute. If you're joining us for the first time, I want to let you in on the format of this show. This isn't one of those sort of like Torah in 2 minutes or just a quick hit. You'll watch this for 2 minutes and understand what the Torah portion is, and then you go about your business. This is something different. This is a live studio recording for a podcast. We're going to be here for an hour-ish, usually. And I'm going to take some pauses to do some kind of my radio voice announcements of the intro of the show and the outro of the show, give some shout outs to people here in the live studio audience. The reason I do this, I've been doing the Jew Curious Show podcasts since about last July or late June, and we've had a lot of interviews. But I began to understand the power of having a live audience ask questions live. And so when people ask their questions about this Parsha, really about any Jewish topic is fair game. When you ask your questions live, and I'm on the spot to answer them, not only do you get your answer, but I believe that if you have a question, somebody else has that question too. And so if you get your answer, then those other people get their answer. And so we are together cooperatively creating a podcast episode for the Jew Curious Show. And just to be clear who the Jew Curious Show is for, it's for Jew curious people. And this includes, in my mind, people who are Jewish, people who are not Jewish or not yet. Maybe there's people who are on the path to conversion. They're pretty serious about that. They may be driving to the mikveh today. And all the more so, I like to give them chizuk. I like to give them encouragement as they're in that process. It might be somebody who's been Jewish their whole life, and for whatever reason, maybe hasn't been back in a while, or hasn't ever been to a synagogue or participated in Jewish community, feels kind of locked out of their understanding of Jewish rituals, even though it is their birthright, and they're curious about how to get involved maybe as an adult for the first time or the first time in a while. There are some people who listen to the show who are faithful to another religion like Christianity or something, and they're just curious about the Jewish roots of their own tradition. And I also hear from people who are, self-described spiritual seekers, right? They're just trying on a bunch of different paths to see which one is right for them. If any of these things describe you, you are welcome here. So this is a place for people who are curious about Judaism, curious about Jewish traditions, and I make this place for you because I firmly believe that learning about Judaism, learning about Jewish people is a path to a life of greater meaning and joy and human connection and personal growth. That's what it has been for me. And now all I'm doing is just kind of paying it forward, making room for Jew-curious people just like you to get your questions answered, to satisfy your curiosity, and to maybe learn about a next step on your path. So we're going to start with the introduction to the podcast, and then I'll give some shout-outs to our gracious individuals who have joined us in the live studio audience, and it goes a little something like this. Hero, if you are Jew curious, you may be reading the Torah this week and scratching your head, or maybe scratching your skin, because we talk about scaly skin afflictions and things like that. It seems a little nasty, a little creepy, a little scary, and you might wonder, what does this have to do with my life today? These are some ancient diseases or something. I've never seen a person with leprosy, and I don't really relate to this. And this is a challenging part of the Torah. I'm not going to lie to you. However, based on what the rabbis of our tradition interpret, I believe this can teach us a lot about how we walk in the world today, what is our responsibility toward other people, and what is our community's responsibility toward us. And we're going to talk about all of that. And we're going to talk about all that right after this bass. And so right now, while I've got the air conditioner on in the background, it's a great time to take a sample of silence, which is critical for doing the post-production cleanup of the podcast sound. So we're going to count to 10 silently. Thank you, Ron Snow, for that introduction. Thank you, Joey Weissenberg and the Hadar Ensemble for those inspiring opening beats. Thank you to everybody who has showed up for our live studio audience for this recording. And most of all, thank you, Hero, for listening to the Jew Curious Show. This is our weekly Parashat Hashavua show, which means we're going to talk about the Torah portion of the week in just a second. But first, I want to give some shout-outs acknowledging the minion we have made. We have just gotten 10 people join us for the live studio recording here on YouTube, and I want to give mad props to Kathy from California. Ruthie is here from SoCal as well. Got a couple of Capricorns in the house, they say. Vanessa is here from Germany, and we've got KG Wilcox from the Philadelphia suburbs, which means we are bi-coastal and international today. Let's see who else is joining us here today. That's why editing software is great. I know this is bad radio to be silent at all. Trig Bell gives us a shalom. Jason Brown, who I believe is from Ireland, is giving us a shalom as well. Nice to see you here. Carla is calling in from Pasadena, California. Glad you're in Pasadena, Carla. Let's see who else is joining us. Josh Kaufman is coming in from Alaska. We have expanded our American time zones, everybody. So glad to see you here, Josh. We've got Nancy Medina in the house. Nancy's coming in from the Jew Curious School. Glad to see you, Nancy. Miriam is from New Hampshire, also a part of our Jew Curious School. Glad to see you here. Grysicle, Shabbat Shalom from beautiful Idlewild, California at 7,200 feet. I didn't know we had 7,200 feet in California, but I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad to learn new things. So let's see. So that sums it up for our live studio audience, or at least those who are brave enough to identify themselves. Whoever is out there right now watching this show on YouTube, I highly encourage you to ask what questions you have about the Parashat Hashavua, about any Jewish topic, because I firmly believe that if you have a question, somebody else has that question too, and if you ask it and I answer it, then everybody else out there is getting an answer as well. So curiosity and questions are an act of generosity on your part, which I'd like to highly encourage. And I'll say, as long as we've been doing these live shows, I have never been disappointed at the generosity and hospitality of the people in the chat. If you are curious about this, hero, if you would like to participate in one of our live studio recording sessions, check me out on YouTube. Just go to youtube.com, look for Rabbi John Carrier. That's John with an H, Carrier with 3 R's, like the big boat that carries airplanes. And when you go to my channel page, you will see all of the upcoming scheduled live sessions. Pick a topic of your choosing, or join us for one of our Monday Ask Me Anything sessions, or one of our Friday Parashat Hashavua weekly Torah portion lessons. And I'd love to see you here, and I'd love to help co-create the Jew Curious show with you. So, without further ado, we're going to jump into this week's Torah portion. And this week's Torah portion is Tazria. It is in the book of Leviticus. And sometimes, I'm not going to lie to you, this is a hard one to get through. Tazria and Metzora, the one that follows, are sometimes read together. This year, because it's a leap year on the Hebrew calendar, are read separately. And these mostly concern themselves with what they call plague or leprosy or some apparent ailment or illness, either afflicting a human being, something that's apparent on their skin, or afflicting a house or textiles or things. Like you might get this kind of eruption of schmutz on your linens, on the walls of your house. You know, if you've ever suffered black mold or something in your house, you might understand what this looks like. And it's icky. I'm not gonna mince words here. I'm a huge fan of horror movies myself. Love the zombie films in particular. But when I think about this, I think about our people wandering through the wilderness, having these scaly skin afflictions. It's a little bit heartbreaking, especially when they talk about these people being excluded from holy activity. If you have these kind of skin afflictions that are visible, you go to the priest, you get checked out, and they say, okay, I'm sorry, but let's say for the next week, you are not permitted to bring sacrifices. You're not permitted to participate in our connection with God. You're in the penalty box, fella. And come back next week, we'll check you out again. And if a sufficient amount of time has passed without visible sign of these things, you immerse in water, you wait a period of time, and then you can come back. One thing that I like to point out is that these afflictions that we're talking about are never discussed as being permanent afflictions, right? If you have this thing, it's assumed that you will get better. This is a temporary condition, and this isn't about your identity. This is about your status, right? This isn't about you're a bad person because you have this. It's you're a person who's going through a bad time because you have this. Nevertheless, it can be upsetting because the person might be excluded not just from holy activity, but sent out of the camp. They have a special place that they have to go to so that they don't, let's say, infect other people. And there is even a line in our Parsha this week near the end, and I want to say chapter 13, about verse 45, 46. It says, if you have this uncleanliness on you, you're supposed to go into public and it says you put your hand over your lip and you shout unclean, unclean, or tameh, tameh. They were speaking Hebrew back then. They say if you have this thing, you're supposed to say tameh, tameh, in a sense where in a way that everybody can hear you. And so if you can imagine, this is pretty embarrassing as it is, that you have this this what's called a tsa'arat, this scaly skin affliction. But you could cover that up. You could walk through the square like nothing's going on, but you are enjoined to shout out, tameh, tameh, right? I'm unclean. And if you have this, the eruptions themselves are called sa'arat. A person who has this is called a metzorah. And you're identifying yourself as a metzorah to everybody in the community. And that seems a little bit like public shaming, which is kind of hard to take, in my humble opinion. Nevertheless, there is a midrash, there is an exploration of this that links this particular physical affliction to a spiritual cause. And they identify it in a couple of different ways. One is linguistic, and the other is narrative. The linguistic identification is that they say this word metzorah, meaning one who is afflicted from this meaning one who is afflicted by this condition, stands for, the word metzorah stands for Motze Shem Ra. Like if you are a metzorah, you are a Motzi Shem Ra. And metzorah is kind of an acronym for that. And what does Motzi Shem Ra mean? It means one who spreads a bad name. This is, in the rabbis' minds, slander. So if you are afflicted with this, it's because you're going around gossiping or saying bad things about other people. You are slandering other people, and this transgression on the dignity of another human being manifests itself physically. And we were discussing this in the Jew Curious School earlier this week, and we identified the comment saying, pretty is as pretty does, right? If a person's beauty isn't just about their physical beauty, but also about the comeliness of their actions. And conversely, if you act badly, we call that ugly behavior, right? The person may be physically beautiful, but their behavior repels us. And so the rabbis take a look at this and they say, Metzorah is Motze Shem Ra, one who spreads a bad name. And it's not just a pun. They actually look at a portion of our people's story. This is the narrative justification, where there is an episode where Miriam, the sister of Moses and Aaron, speaks badly about her brother, speaks badly about Moses, in, I guess, a fit of jealousy or being upset about something. She speaks badly about her brother, and it says right after that she contracts this kind of, they call it leprosy. Again, that's not totally accurate, but she contracts this kind of plague or skin affliction that's visible, and she's sent out of the camp until such time as she makes amends for what she said. And because we have a story of Miriam gossiping, slandering, and then being afflicted with this, they thought that when people had this skin affliction, it's because they were spreading bad rumors about other people. And it's not necessarily obvious or explicit in the words of the Torah that this is what causes this. However, in the age of the rabbis, they realized that, I'll put it this way, there's a saying out there, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me. And I want to make it super clear to you, hero, that this is not a Jewish saying. The rabbis of our tradition realized a long time ago, at least 2,000 years ago, that sticks and stones they can be painful, or they get hit with some sticks and stones themselves, especially by the Romans. Calling you out, Roman Empire. Waiting for a reprisal there. Guess they're not in business anymore. But they realize that we hurt each other severely with our words all the time. In fact, in a civilized society, where violence between people, physical violence between people, is mostly contained, mostly kind of at the fringes of criminal activity instead of a common everyday occurrence, that the way we hurt each other the most is precisely with our words, whether we are speaking badly about someone, gossiping when they're not around, talking behind their back, or when we are speaking to someone in a way that degrades them. And over the years, the rabbis even developed these two categories of Jewish law, or these two particular kinds of transgression that we are to avoid at all costs. One is something called Lashon Hara, or you might have heard it called Lashon Hora. It's just a different Ashkenazi pronunciation. Lashon Hara means like the evil tongue or wicked speech. And this is like this Motzi Shem Ra that we're talking about. This is when you're speaking badly about someone who's not around. This is slander, this is gossip, and things like that. And there's another category called onat davarim, or oppressing with words. And this is the category of speaking to someone or about someone in their presence in a way that humiliates them. And both of these things, rabbis throughout the ages have cautioned us against, and say that, again, in a civilized society where violence is mostly contained, we do the most violence with our words. In the Yom Kippur service, and I know we got a little time, we're busy prepping for Passover, John. Why are you bugging us about Yom Kippur? But in the Yom Kippur service, there's a couple of places where we recite something called the Alkanes. It's this litany of sins, quite literally. We stand there, we beat our chest, going through all the things that we might have done wrong that year. God forgive us for stealing, God forgive us for lying, God forgive us for gossiping, blaspheming, what have you. And it's this long list of ways in which we might impair our relationship with God or impair our relationship with other people and wrong other people. And one day I sat down, I looked at all of these things, with like a little pencil, and I marked off the ones that are related to speech. Of all this long list of sins that humans might seek forgiveness for, 44% of the things listed are sins that we commit with our voices, with our mouths, with our speech, right? Whether that's blasphemy, whether that's speaking badly about God, whether it's Lashon Hara, speaking badly about another person, whether it's Onat Avarim, speaking to someone in a way that humiliates them. This could include things like, if somebody had commit errors in the past, but was on the path to tshuva, on reforming their lives, you're not allowed to say to them, hey, yeah, you look pretty good right now, but remember back when we used to steal cars together? Or remember back when we used to run around, or you used to be a drunk or whatever, and that humiliates them even though they're working on themselves in that way. We're not allowed to mislead people in business dealings. That's another way of oppression. We're actually causing them financial loss by our words. And in the section, this is my favorite section of Torah in Bava Metzia. This is my favorite section of Talmud in Bava Metzia, about 58 to 59, and it talks about how the transgression, the violence, the verbal violence of embarrassing someone in public was considered as grave as the sin of spilling blood. And this is one of the first transgressions mentioned in the Torah, when Cain and Abel go at it, and Cain kills his brother, and it says that his blood cries out to God from the ground. Right? Spilling blood was one of the first no-nos in the Torah, and the rabbis of the Talmud take great pains to say, when you embarrass somebody, it's like spilling their blood. And one rabbi says, yes, I know, I see this. This is obvious, because when you say something that humiliates someone, first they blush, which means all the blood rushes into their face turns red, and then they blanch, right? Then they turn white as a ghost. And by this, going red and then going white, they say it's as if you'd cut that person's throat. It's as if you'd spilled their blood, because the blood disappears from their visage. And there's even, there's one rabbi from Babylonia asking another rabbi from Eretz Yisrael, the rabbis in Eretz Yisrael, whom we hold in highest regard, what is it that they're most concerned about in terms of human behavior? And the rabbi from, I believe it was Rav Dimi from Eretz Yisrael, said, we are most concerned about the spilling of blood in the instance of, back up, we are most concerned about protecting the dignity of the individual by not speaking badly to them in a way that humiliates them. And so I know I'm kind of beating this horse a little bit. This is a bit of a hobby horse for me. When I was in rabbinical school and was kind of a chaplain on campus at one place, and I had to deal with this. I had to deal with an event of cyberbullying where students were being mean to each other through text messages, and I was seeking the Torah to address this. Went to my teacher, Rabbi Elliot Dorff, and he pointed out to me the Mishnah in Bava Metzia that talks about Ona Devarim. And I see this happening all the time. People are on a rampage of trying to humiliate each other, right? To shame one another. I would go so far as to say, if it weren't for Lashon Hara and Ona Devarim, if it weren't for slander and humiliation, Twitter might not exist. So I know there are people who teach good Torah on Twitter and people who build communities on Twitter, but so much of it is full of this kind of public humiliation or striving toward public humiliation. This is the dross of our connected world. This is the tsa'arat of our ability to connect with one another. The modern day tsa'arat, I'll say, is all these trolls, whether they are bots or real people, going out of their way to humiliate one another in public. And the rabbis saw this as a problem back in the day. Even the early Hebrews saw that when somebody commit this kind of crime, the best thing to do was put them in the penalty box, to set them aside, to remove them from the situation so that they couldn't continue to spread that kind of ill will. And so I want to go back to this moment in Leviticus chapter 13, verse 46, where the person who is afflicted with this skin condition that we deduce comes from slander, they had to go through the public square and say, Tameh, Tameh, I am unclean, I am unclean. And what purpose this serves? Because if we're trying to stop public humiliation, why do we then put this kind of humiliation on the person who's perpetrating this? Is this fighting fire with fire? Is this midah keneged midah, or measure for measure? How do you like it, buddy, that you're humiliated in public now? But the rabbis take a look at this and say, no, it's not about humiliating that person. It serves two practical, how do I want to put this? It serves two practical purposes. Rashi takes a look at this as a medieval commentator from what is now France, about 1,000 years ago. And he says, it's obvious, you're walking through the public square and you shout unclean to let people know to stay away from you, right? This is a public health issue, right? Whether it's, they thought this was actually physically contagious or it was, let's say, socially contagious, as gossip and slander can be. It was to let people distance themselves from you, to stop the spread of either the flaky skin or the slander itself. The rabbis believe that when somebody commits slander, when somebody says something bad about another person, there are actually three victims. There is the slanderer, him or herself, and becomes spiritually impaired by this. It's, of course, the person who the slander is about gets lowered in others' esteem. But it's also the person who listens to this, right? Even if, you're not committing the slander, it's not about you. Just by listening to this, you can be damaged. You can be sullied. You can be a victim of this crime. And so all the more so, when somebody's going around spreading nasty rumors, they should be set aside and others should know to stay away from them. But another rabbi comes along and says, wait a minute, why does it say tameh, tameh, and not just tameh? It could, just in case you didn't hear me the first time, I'm unclean. Right. our tradition holds that the Torah wastes no words, right? There's no needless repetition. There's no redundancy in what the Torah has to say. And so when it says a word twice like that, it's to teach two things. And in this case, the rabbis looked at this and they said, okay, we get the distancing yourself from the unclean person, but perhaps the other reason for saying that you are tameh is to encourage other people to pray for you, right? One tameh is to encourage people to keep their distance. The other tameh is to say, look, I know I did something wrong. I'm suffering for it. I really regret it. I really want to be restored to the community. Will you pray for me to help hasten my healing? And I think this teaches a powerful lesson about community responsibility, the responsibility of the individual within a community and the responsibility of the community towards the individual. So it's not just a public health issue, it's also a public compassion issue, right? Even though I've done something wrong, I'm begging for your forgiveness. I'm begging for your help in reforming my life in this way. By the way, you should probably keep your distance, right? So the individual who is afflicted by this, who some would say had brought it on him or herself by spreading slander in the first place, has a responsibility to the community to let them keep their distance, but also has the right to ask for help. And the community, on the flip side, has the right to know when somebody is communicable, right? They have the right to know to preserve their safety, but they also have the responsibility to take care of the individual who is in these dire straits, even if we believe they brought it on themselves. And that's why there's this repetition of tameh, tameh, to teach both sides of that coin. And I believe there's a reinforcement of this in the Mishnah in Masechet Midot, chapter 2, chapter 2, Mishnah 2, where it talks about how people would enter and move within the Temple Mount. Back in the day when the temple stood, they had entrances and exits, and it said for the most part, people came in this one gate, and then they would walk around the Temple Mount and exit by this other gate. However, if someone had had something bad happen to them, they were instructed to, walk in the same gate, but walk around the different directions. So instead of going to the left, instead of going counterclockwise, they would walk clockwise around the Temple Mount. And I learned this many years ago. I believe it was from Rabbi Sharon Brous at Ikar talking about this. The first time I was aware of this Mishnah, probably about 10 years ago at this point. And it challenges our assumptions about how we treat people who are in a dark place, right? Many times when somebody's had something bad happen to them, and it mentions things like illness or excommunication, being excluded from the community for some reason. Maybe it was a crime they committed or something else. On the one hand, we have illness, which is entirely out of somebody's control. On the other hand, we have somebody who's suffering because of something they did. In either case, we are encouraging them to single themselves out, right? It is, I'll say, a human instinct to embrace those people, to say, look, we're not going to treat you different from anybody else. You're still part of the tribe. We're not going to make you embarrass yourselves by walking in the other direction so that everybody knows that you're in a bad place, right? You want to just act like nothing happened sometimes. But the rabbis in the Mishnah say that if somebody is singling themselves out to walk around in the other direction, whether it's because of something that happened to them or a situation they created themselves, it's worth the rest of us knowing, right? And when you see somebody coming back the other way, not walking in the direction that you're walking, you have a responsibility to say, why are you walking the other way? What's happening with you? What's going on with you right now, buddy? And the rabbis in the Mishnah instruct us, if the person says, I have an illness or I have lost somebody, then the response is, may the one who resides in this house, and they're talking about the temple, so they're talking about God, may the one who resides in this house comfort you. And if the answer, when you ask, what's going on, buddy, that you're walking around the other way, is, I'm Mikudan, I'm excommunicated, then you don't shun them, but you pray for them. You say, may the one who resides in this house fill the hearts of your judges with compassion, that you can be restored to our presence soon, right? Whether somebody is suffering because they lost somebody or an illness, something that they had no control over, or whether somebody is suffering because of something they did, the community has the responsibility to pray that they re-enter the fold. And in a Parsha that's mostly about flaky skin and boils with hair on them and icky stuff and mold on your walls, that the sages of our tradition can bring out this kind of meaning, can bring out these lessons that are very relevant to today. If people got a skin infection every time they said something nasty on Twitter, there would be a lot more dermatologists, I'll put it that way. So I wanted to share this with you. This is an insight that I got from the Torah this week, and I felt incumbent upon me to share that with you because I think this is one of the most powerful lessons for our time. You may think that your gossip and your slander is a victimless crime, but it might be as plain as the nose on your face. Nevertheless, if this is something that you find yourself in, you may be in the penalty box, but you also have a responsibility to say, look, I'm going to stop this right where it started, and I'm going to ask you to help me reform my ways. So that's what I wanted to teach today, everybody on the chat. I may take a little bit of a pass. I've got some people entering my apartment right now to change the air filter, and I'll talk to you in just a second. We're going to take 5. Hi there.
Hi. We're here just to check the filter.
Okay, come on in. I'm on a phone call. That's okay. So you might hear some rattling around in the air conditioner right now. So that's what I wanted to share with people today. Let's take a look at what we've got in the chat. Feel free to turn it off if you need to. Is it going up there? All right. So let's take a look. This is bad radio right now. I'm going back into the chat just to see what's going on. Somebody, I see KG Wilcox mentioning the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim is the authority. This is a rabbi of the, let's say, late 19th century who really wrote the book on Lashon Hara, quite literally. Chafetz Chaim, meaning one who desires life, wrote the book Shmirat HaLashon, or Guard Your Tongue, which is the authoritative text on how not to commit this kind of slander. I think for me, one of the most surprising lessons of this text was you're not only not allowed to, let's say mean things about people, you are also not allowed to say nice things about people, according to the Chafetz Chaim. Like, if you spread good gossip, this might have a bad effect in the sense of, like, oh, I went over to so-and-so's house for Shabbat and they made this wonderful brisket and it was delicious. Somebody else might come out and say, yeah, well, why haven't they invited me over to Shabbat? And they're very stingy. Or, yeah, I had that same brisket and I got heartburn. Sometimes when we say nice things about people, even polite gossip, it encourages impolite gossip. And so we're encouraged not to talk about people who aren't around in general. You can praise someone to their face, let's say, but you shouldn't praise people behind their back. This is according to the Chafetz Chaim. So I don't know what that does to your opinion about leaving Yelp reviews, but you do you. Let's see. Miriam shares, sounds like the Salem witch trial era, moles, etc. on your body, except they were killed, not just being put in the penalty box. Rabbi, I love the hockey metaphors. So I'm not a Hasid of hockey, but I do know what a penalty box is. I did spend enough time in New England to have watched a couple of games. Let's see what is going on here. Kathy shares, by the way, schmutz. I think I used the word schmutz earlier. Means dirt or a similar unpleasant substance, and it's in Yiddish. It's often in the context of you got some schmutz on your face. Like the mother would like lick her thumb and then like rub dirt off your cheek. That's how you deal with schmutz. Is usually with saliva. I've seen for the most part. Let's see. Trig shares, I unfortunately need to remember these life lessons. And Trig, I am with you, right? I fully believe that the Torah doesn't give us stuff to do that we don't need to do. As I often say, they don't post speed limit signs on a street where people aren't speeding. And the Torah doesn't give us commandments, especially the negative commandments, thou shalt not, if God didn't see us doing these things all the time, right? We have thou shalt not murder for a reason. We have these traditions of thou shalt not speak badly about people or speak badly to people if it wasn't a human instinct to do this all the time. And look, gossip is fun, y'all. I'm not going to lie to you. Gossip is a very popular human activity for a very important reason. It's become like social currency. If you have a secret to tell, you have something valuable to share. And when you share something valuable, it raises you in the esteem of others, right? When you share something with somebody about somebody else, you're increasing knowledge in that space. You're making the person you tell it to feel included in your circle of friends. So gossip about other people is like social capital, right? And we spend that capital in order to get a return on our investment. And if that didn't work, then we wouldn't do it all the time. But what we don't take into account is the externalities of that. And I think that's what the Torah is here to teach is like, look, yes, I know it's fun. Yes, I know it's good for you and good for your reputation to do that sometimes, but it can have damaging effects. And I'm as guilty of this as anybody else, right? I was sharing with people in the Jew Curious School earlier this week. Look, I learned to read from Mad Magazine. This is a magazine with a very Yiddish sensibility, I'll say, but it also has parody and it has satire and it has making fun of other things and other people. And as a child, and even today, I used humor as a defense mechanism. When there was somebody bigger and stronger than me picking on me physically, I would use my words to make fun of them, to humiliate them as a defense mechanism. And this extended into my 20s and my 30s. And even, when I was in rabbinical school, I had one of my professors take me aside and said, this is something you need to work on. Maybe this worked for you before, but this doesn't work for you as a rabbi because this is contrary to what Torah teaches us to do. And so that has been a struggle for me. And as talking about these college students earlier who are texting mean things to each other, like talking about their sexuality and things like that, and trying to humiliate one another, I saw the pain that caused. And that led me to this teaching. And that's been probably my primary teaching ever since, is that yes, it's a natural human instinct to do these things. And it can be a defense mechanism. It could be a way of raising your social status, but it's not without consequence. And so if we can think of a way to live without diminishing others in people's eyes, that's a better way to live. Rabbi Artson gives a lesson every year to the people graduating from the rabbinical school, and it goes through this Mishnah of various good attributes for a teacher. And one of the things it says is don't make small talk, right? It's like the teachers shouldn't make small talk. And when we hear small talk, we think about, the weather or traffic or sort of just chit chat that is kind of like, the social glue that binds us together but has no ultimate value. But he had a different interpretation of small talk. And for him, small talk is talk that makes other people small. When we make fun of somebody for their race, religion, sexual identity, politics, appearance, what have you, that is talk that is intended to make other people small, perhaps with the idea that it might elevate us in comparison. And if we didn't do it all the time, there wouldn't be laws against it, as it were. So all the more so because this is a common human instinct that can be very damaging. This is one of my favorite topics to teach about, not just because I want to stop other people and be, as I say, Rabbi Buzzkill, but because this has been a very valuable lesson for me to learn as well. And as I have learned this and continue to work on it, I want to pay it forward to share it with my students as well. So let's take a look at what else is going on in the chat. Brandy shares on Atavarim is really interesting to me. When I volunteered in classrooms, I was really taken aback by the way adults speak to kids. Well-meaning adults, even 12-year-olds, deserve respect. I'm glad you brought that up because we may think, it's our job to put them in their place in order that they can learn better. However, there's a Mishnah from Pirkei Avot that says a teacher should value the dignity of their students as much as they value their own dignity. And I was a school administrator at one point, and I saw that teachers were speaking to children in a way that lowered their self-esteem. And I'm not one of these, like everybody gets a trophy. We need to really promote self-esteem above all other things. But when I saw self-esteem being impaired, intentionally or unintentionally, by how an adult spoke, I didn't take them aside and say, okay, stop talking about your kids that way. Instead, I brought this Mishnah and I said, okay, this comes from Pirkei Avot. This comes from the sages of our tradition saying you should hold the dignity of your student, especially when they're in front of other students, as dear to you as you regard your own dignity. Let's see what else is going on here. Ruthie shares, I had a boss that enjoyed publicly humiliating her employees. It was very difficult to work with this person. And I remember seeing a study recently that most of the time when people quit a job, they don't quit the job, they quit the boss. I think it's something like 80% of the time when people quit a position, it's not because of the work itself, it's because of how they get along or don't with their supervisor. And I'll say this often comes from a cycle of abuse in the sense that if somebody worked their way through a management structure where they were abused and humiliated, that's how they were raised professionally, as it were. They will then turn around and do that to their employees because that's how they learned how to lead. And I've experienced this myself. Back before my rabbi days, I was a financial analyst and a computer programmer. I essentially, was like a spreadsheet jockey for a living. And I worked in a number of places where my supervisor was, let's say, a former Big Four, Big Six consulting employee. And I could tell, and in that environment, these are very high-pressure management consulting environments, some people have good bosses and some people have bad bosses. And the people who had good bosses were good bosses. And the people who had bad bosses were in turn abusive to the people in their charge. And so I see this all the time, and that's reformed how I behave as a supervisor when I'm a supervisor, but it also informs how I pick with whom to work, because I firmly believe that there's no amount of money in the world that is worth working for somebody who's going to be abusive and humiliate people. Even if you're on their good side, if they're doing it to other people, eventually it's going to come out to you. Let's see. Just taking a look in the chat, I see people chattering in the back of the room. I really appreciate that. Some teachers don't like it when people are chatting off topic. I actually love it because it's a testament to the community that we are building here in the Jew Curious show and school and posse, I'll say. Vanessa shares, how about suicide? I know certain religions consider this to be an ultimate sin and shun the family, while others consider it to be a mental illness where the victim was unable to control their actions. And I think this does relate to the topic in the sense that when someone dies from suicide, in many cultures, including the Jewish one, there is a kind of a stigma attached to that becomes a source of shame for the family. And either other people are talking badly about the family, or they're just afraid other people are talking about the family, and that interferes with their process of grief. Now, I will say, by the traditional Jewish law understanding of suicide, you shouldn't do it, right? Unlike in American law, where people are considered the owners of their own body, in Jewish law, we are stewards of our body. Our body belongs to God. And committing suicide is destroying that body that God gave us to do mitzvahs in this world, right? So I'm going to say, don't do it, right? If you're thinking about it, there's lots of ways to find help for this. I'm not trying to shame anybody who's thinking about it, but I will say, killing oneself is against Jewish law. But when it comes to the stigma of it, that's something that I think we need to let go of, in the sense that we used to look at this as a conscious, selfish sin. Now, I believe, just based on people that I've talked to, I like to think we understand it a lot better as in a terminal outcome of a mental illness. Meaning, when someone takes their own life, it's not them making a selfish, conscious choice to do that. Rather, it is the mental illness that they have that kills them. And why I think it's important to look at it that way is, and I learned this from one of my teachers, Rabbi Ed Feinstein, here in Los Angeles, who says, look, you wouldn't gossip about a family who had a child who died of cancer, right? What we think about as a physical illness out of that person's control. Why would you gossip about somebody whose child died of suicide, which we are increasingly understanding as a terminal outcome of a physical illness, right? Depression, mental illness, this is something that happens in the brain, right? And yes, there can be environmental factors that exacerbate that. However, this is the terminal natural outcome of a mental illness. And just as you wouldn't shame somebody from dying of cancer, you can't shame someone from dying of this other kind of illness. And that influences Rabbi Feinstein's behavior as far as officiating funerals, right? Some rabbis in the past wouldn't officiate funerals over somebody who committed suicide, right? Because it was considered a shame. It was a shanda. It was this, excuse me, this horrible thing that, if we honored the dead, then we might be endorsing that behavior somehow. And I really like that Rabbi Feinstein flipped this. And I know he's not the only one, but he's the one I learned it from, that when this happens, it is a shame, right? It shouldn't happen. But it's a shame in the same way that dying of cancer or some other physical illness is a shame. It's not a shame on that family, and God forbid we make it that way by the way we speak about that family in public. So I'm just going to take a look and see what else is going on in the chat here. So William asked the question, the color white is usually considered a sign of purity or tahara, cleanliness. Why is the sign of tumah? Why is it the sign of tumah or defilement in Negaim in 13:3? And so what William is raising is that when you're looking at this particular skin condition, let's say you might have some white hair where there's normally black hair, right? And this is considered like the dead tissue and things like this. So yes, the color white is usually considered a sign of purity. When the Hebrews were surrounding Sinai before receiving the Ten Commandments, they were told to wash their clothes, and that's one of the reasons they say we eat dairy products on Shavuot, is because after walking through the desert for 7 weeks, when you wash your clothes, everything looks white. And so now we eat blintzes and ice cream and cheesecake for that whiteness. However, the whiteness that appears inside, a tza'arat is an abnormality, in the sense that if you normally have black hair and there's a place that has white hair, if you normally have, pink skin or brown skin and you see white skin, that's an aberration. That's a sign that something is going wrong. Kathy shares a story. This type of thing can even happen with praise. Yes, so we're talking about that with the Chofetz Chaim. She was saying it was at a dinner when the son of the hostess said, "This is the best dish I've ever had," speaking of something that I had made. And the face of the hostess looks suddenly downtrodden because they're saying, hey, maybe you like her cooking more than you like my cooking. So, yes, even when you praise, you should be careful that that praise doesn't embarrass someone else. Dave Jacobson, welcome to the chat. It's good to see you, Dave. Dave says, having been in graduate school in physics, I found out how nasty and degrading other students can be when they attack each other. This is why many thin-skinned people dropped out. This is probably why I'm a rabbi, because I dropped out of pre-med for the exact same reason, because I saw how competitiveness could make people behave in inhumane ways. And I thought, if you've got to be inhumane to be a doctor, that's not the reason I wanted to be a doctor. Also, but there's probably lots of good reasons for me not to be a doctor. I like teaching Torah, and I'm very happy with how that turned out. So listen, everybody, I really appreciate the learning we've been able to do today. I am so grateful for the live studio audience who shows up here every day. We are doing this these days about every weekday at 9 a.m. Pacific time. So if you are interested in joining the live studio recording session, that's usually when I'm on YouTube, 9 a.m. Pacific time, 12 noon on weekdays. If you're curious about what we are going to learn about next, take a look at my YouTube page. That's youtube.com/Rabbi John Carrier. And once a week, usually on Sundays, I update what's going to happen in the coming week. Love to have you join us. And most of all, I want to say thank you, Hero, for listening to this podcast episode right now. It's been my delight to share the insights of this Torah portion that I got from other teachers that I'm now sharing with you. It's been my delight to answer questions and share comments from our live studio audience. If you would like to connect more deeply with this community, I highly recommend you check out the Jew Curious Community Center. This is a lovingly tended, carefully guarded, troll-free private Facebook group that you can connect with by going to jewcurious.show/JCC. Again, that's jewcurious.show/JCC, as in Jew Curious Community Center. And if I could ask for one more favor, just one, please go to iTunes and leave us a review for this show. Give us the appropriate number of stars in your estimation, and I'd love it if you'd leave us a note. Let us know what you think of the show. Let us know what it's done for you and what it might do for someone else. That's how people find out if this show might be right for them. If you do that, Hero, I would, as we say in Texas, be much obliged. And until next time, heroes, peace. All right, I'm going to hang out for a few minutes for the benefit of people in the live studio audience. Thank you, Drake, for being here. Dave Jacobson, haven't seen you here before, or maybe I have and I've forgotten about it, so I really apologize. So, Drake's sharing a last minute from Huntsville, Alabama. Glad to see you, Drake. Caleb Rahino, I think, is Caleb here from, Caleb, are you here from Fort Worth, or am I thinking about somebody else? Let's see. Fernando F shares a Shabbat Shalom. Edith Castro is here saying, because we are beautiful just the way we are and Hashem makes us that way. I'm going to say Amen, or ditto to that. Vanessa asks, do some Jewish religious groups take the Parashat literally, shunning those who they consider to be impure? So there's shunning and there's shunning. There is impure and there is impure, right? There's a practice of cherem or karet. Cherem is kind of our way of shunning people. I'll say traditional Jewish communities' ways of shunning people. There are communities that will shun people in ways that are very similar to what we read about maybe in Amish or Mennonite communities. We've got those kind of groups too, where if somebody seems to be off the path of what fits into community standards, people will shun them, not do business with them, not welcome them into synagogues and things like that. For the most part, this can be pretty ugly. I have seen it used to good effect, however, in the sense of gitin, when I've seen notices posted in certain intensely Jewish neighborhoods of Los Angeles, for example, where somebody put up a poster of a man who had refused to give his wife a divorce, even though he had gone off, he had civilly divorced her, gone off, started another family, but which, according to Jewish law, a man can do, but he had not given her a divorce so that she could remarry. And it said this person has been placed in cherem, or a kind of temporary excommunication. Shun this person until he concedes to unchain his former spouse. And so, yes, a lot of times it's ugly. Sometimes it's I think that's sort of a better effect to use it for. But it's not so much for physical ailments as it is for violating community standards of behavior these days. So we've had a wonderful chat today. Thank you, everybody, for participating. God willing, I'll get this out onto the airwaves. I've got a lot of these backed up, so I find that I have no trouble recording these in the morning, but then my day kind of gets away from me before I can edit them into a podcast. So I've got a few in the can. We've been doing this for about 3-4 weeks now, it feels like. And so very soon, my aspiration is to get all of these live shows out on a daily or semi-daily basis on the Jew Curious Show for people to listen to. I really want everybody out there who can to learn from the great questions that people here have asked. All right, thanks everybody. So I'm going to sign off for today. Get a couple of podcast episodes edited to share on the podcast airwaves, if you will, or data packets through TCP/IP. But again, this week it's been my honor to learn with everybody. We've had some great conversations in the Jew Curious School, great for conversations here, and I couldn't do this alone. I certainly couldn't do it without you, without everybody who's participating. So thank you, Shabbat Shalom, and until next time, heroes, peace.